What happens when the most feared HOA bully finally crosses the line? When her son ties a little girl to a tree, the entire neighborhood turns against her. Phones come out, cameras roll, and her empire of fear begins to crumble, right before everyone's eyes. By the end of the night, the HOA queen is dethroned, and justice is served. "Call your dad." That was the first thing my 9-year-old daughter screamed, her voice echoing through the yard with a mix of panic and desperation. The tone in her cry was so raw, so unlike her usual playful laughter, that it made my heart stop. I dropped the mug of coffee I was holding and ran outside without even grabbing my shoes. The sight that met me froze my blood cold. My little girl was tied to the old oak tree in our front yard. Thick ropes dug into her tiny wrists and ankles, cutting against her skin. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her hair tangled, her knees scraped raw from where she must have struggled against the bark. Her body shook with fear, every sob breaking me into pieces. And there, standing proudly like he had just won some cruel contest, was HOA Karen's son. He held the other end of the rope like a leash, tugging at it and laughing, as though tormenting a child was just another game. His eyes were filled with the kind of arrogance only a spoiled child could carry, the kind that grows when parents never say no. To understand how we got here, you have to know about his mother, Karen. In every neighborhood, there's one person who thinks they rule the world. For us, that was her. She wasn't just a member of the homeowners association, she acted like the president, mayor, and queen all rolled into one. She'd patrol the streets with a clipboard, measuring the length of grass, snapping pictures of mailboxes, and handing out violation notices like they were candy on Halloween. She had fined me for leaving my recycling bin out an extra hour and even threatened another neighbor for having Christmas lights past January. But her son, he was worse. Spoiled to the core, he strutted around the neighborhood like it was his personal playground. I had heard whispers from other parents, how he shoved kids off their bikes, how he stole toys, how he told kids they weren't good enough for his street. Every time someone complained, Karen brushed it off. "Boys will be boys," she'd say with that dismissive smile. She never once made him take responsibility. But this time, this wasn't a prank. This wasn't some harmless mischief. This was cruelty, dark and intentional. When I shouted at him to let her go, he didn't flinch. He didn't look scared or even sorry. Instead, he smirked, tugging on the rope just enough to make my daughter whimper in pain. Then he spat out words that poured gasoline on an already raging fire inside me. "My mom says you people don't belong here. This is our neighborhood." The venom in his voice was far too grown-up for a boy his age. It wasn't his thought, it was Karen's poison, fed into him day after day. He looked at my daughter as though she were beneath him, as though cruelty was his birthright. In that moment, rage surged through me. But beneath the rage was something sharper, resolve. Because what he didn't know, what Karen had never bothered to find out, was that my daughter wasn't unprotected. She had someone in her life who wouldn't just stand by. Her father. A man who had faced dangers that most people couldn't even imagine. A man who had served in Delta Force, trained to handle the toughest missions, the darkest threats, the fiercest enemies. And if there's one thing you never do in this world, it's hurt the daughter of a Delta Force soldier. That boy thought this was a game. Karen thought she could bully and intimidate her way through every situation. But this time, they weren't just dealing with another neighbor to push around. They had crossed the line with the wrong family. And when you hurt his little girl, you don't just face an angry father. You awaken something you cannot control. I rushed forward, my hands shaking as I fought to loosen the knots around my daughter's wrists. She winced in pain, her tiny arms marked red where the rope had pressed too tightly. I whispered softly, "It's okay, baby, I've got you. You're safe now." But before I could fully untie her, a loud, sharp voice pierced through the yard. "What on earth is going on here?" It was Karen. And just like that, the real storm had arrived. She stomped across her perfectly trimmed lawn like she owned the entire street, her hands planted firmly on her hips, sunglasses perched on her nose even though the sun was slipping behind the clouds. Her son darted behind her, smirking as though backup had arrived. To him, Mom wasn't just a parent, she was a shield, his permanent, get-out-of-jail-free card. I turned to face her, my daughter still clinging to me. "Your son tied my child to a tree." I snapped, my voice breaking between fury and disbelief. But Karen didn't gasp. She didn't look horrified. She didn't even glance at my daughter's tear-stained face. Instead, she rolled her eyes like I had just complained about a dog barking too loudly. "Oh, please," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You're overreacting. They're children. Kids play rough sometimes. Don't make a federal case out of nothing." Nothing. She had the audacity to call it nothing. I stood there, stunned. My daughter was shaking in my arms, ropes still dangling from her wrists, and this woman was acting like it was no more serious than a scraped knee. Her son, emboldened by her presence, muttered from behind her, "Told you they don't belong here." Karen smirked at that and nodded as if he'd just delivered a wise truth. "Look, if you can't handle how we do things in this neighborhood, maybe this isn't the right place for you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We value respectable families here, people who fit the community." The implication stung like a slap. She wasn't just excusing her son's cruelty, she was justifying it, turning it into our fault for daring to exist on the same street. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm, but inside I was boiling. My daughter's sobs still echoed in my ears, each one twisting the knife deeper. "Respectable families," I shot back. "Is that what you call this? Teaching your son to tie up children and taunt them like animals?" Karen's face tightened. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed her features, but she quickly covered it with a laugh. "You're being dramatic. No one was hurt. If you want to escalate this, fine, but remember, I'm on the HOA board. I have the authority here." Authority. That word rolled off her tongue like she was untouchable, like the 3 letters HOA gave her the power of a crown and scepter. But then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. One glance at the screen was all it took. A name lit up that shifted everything. I didn't need to explain much. Just one text, a single sentence. "Your daughter was tied to a tree." And that was enough. I slipped my phone away, my heart steadier now. Because I knew what was coming. Karen didn't. Her smug little kingdom was about to crumble, and she had no idea the storm she had just called down on herself. A few minutes later, the deep, unmistakable roar of a black truck echoed down the street. Heads turned, neighbors peeked out from porches and blinds. Karen's confidence faltered, just slightly, as the sound grew louder. Then the truck door slammed, and her smirk faded faster than a shadow at sunset. The truck engine cut off, and for a moment, the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Even the breeze quieted, as though the neighborhood itself knew something was about to change. The driver's side door creaked open, then slammed shut with a finality that made Karen flinch. Out stepped my daughter's father. Broad-shouldered, his posture straight as a soldier's, he didn't rush, didn't storm. He walked with that controlled calm that's far more terrifying than rage. His boots hit the pavement with a steady rhythm, each step deliberate, measured, as if the ground itself respected his presence. Karen, who only moments ago was brimming with false authority, actually took a step back. Her sunglasses slipped slightly down her nose, revealing eyes that flickered between arrogance and sudden fear. Still, she tried to recover her composure, plastering on a brittle smile. "Oh, this is all just a misunderstanding," she blurted out, her voice rising too high to sound convincing. She spun around to face her son, who now stood frozen, rope dangling loosely from his hand. "Right, sweetie. You were just playing with her, weren't you?" The boy didn't answer. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, guilty face. He looked at his shoes, kicking at the dirt like it could swallow him whole. Meanwhile, my daughter's father crouched down to eye level with his little girl. His large, calloused hands were gentle as he brushed the tears from her cheeks. His voice, calm but commanding, asked, "Did he do this to you?" She sniffled and nodded, pointing a trembling finger at Karen's son. That single gesture was all it took. He stood. Slowly. Purposefully. His shadow seemed to stretch over both Karen and her boy. His eyes, calm, cold, unblinking, locked onto them, and for the first time all evening, silence blanketed the yard. "You tied my daughter to a tree," he said, his voice even, controlled. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every word carried a weight that made Karen's son shrink back another step. "You don't lay a hand on her. Ever." Karen laughed nervously, fanning her face as if the tension were just a bit too warm for her liking. "Sir, I think you're overreacting. This was harmless. No one was in danger. Let's just not escalate this." But he didn't look at her. His gaze stayed fixed on the boy, who shuffled behind his mother's legs. The boy wasn't facing an ordinary angry parent. He was facing someone trained to remain calm under fire, someone who had seen worse than a suburban bully, someone who didn't bluff. Finally, he turned his eyes to Karen. His tone was sharp now, cutting through her excuses like glass. "Do you really want to teach him that this is acceptable? To hurt others, to humiliate a child, and call it nothing? That ends tonight." Karen opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to command, but he cut her off with one sentence that shattered her mask of control. "I'm Delta Force. Do you really think I take threats to my daughter lightly?" The words landed like thunder. A murmur rippled through the neighbors who had gathered at their windows and porches. Phones were raised higher, recording every second. Karen's face drained of color. Her son whimpered, clutching her arm, suddenly realizing the rope in his hand wasn't a toy but evidence of something far darker. And in that moment, Karen's reign of intimidation over the neighborhood cracked. She was no longer the one holding power. The balance had shifted, and everyone could feel it. By now, the street looked like a stage. Curtains, meaning blinds and curtains, were pulled just far enough for neighbors to peek out. A few bolder ones had stepped onto their porches, phones in hand, the blue glow of recording screens reflecting off their faces. The tension was so thick you could almost hear it crackling in the air. Karen's son clung to her side, no longer the smug little bully who had tied a child to a tree. His bravado had dissolved into wide-eyed fear. His mother, however, wasn't ready to surrender. She adjusted her sunglasses with a shaky hand and tried to summon that old HOA confidence, the one that had kept the neighborhood under her thumb for years. "All right, enough," she said, her voice sharp but trembling at the edges. "This is a private matter. You people don't get to parade your drama in front of the whole community." She turned her head slightly, glaring at the neighbors recording. "Put those phones away before I fine every last one of you." The threat fell flat. No one moved. In fact, one neighbor, a man from 3 houses down, called back, "Fine us for what? You're the one letting your kid tie up children." A chorus of murmurs followed, some angry, some mocking, but all directed at Karen. Her power was slipping, and she could feel it. My daughter's father didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff up his chest or throw around threats. He simply stepped closer, his presence commanding the space like gravity itself. "This isn't a private matter," he said evenly. "Your son crossed a line. He caused harm. And if you don't correct it, others will." His eyes flicked briefly to the cameras. Karen's jaw tightened. She knew he was right. This wasn't going away. Karen spun to her son, grabbing his shoulders, whispering through gritted teeth, "Apologize." "No." But the boy shook his head, his lip trembling. He couldn't bring himself to speak. The guilt, the shame, the fear, it all tangled into silence. And his silence said more than any forced apology could. The father didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His calm, low voice carried across the yard like steel. "You're raising him to think cruelty is power," he said. "But real power is protecting the weak. Teaching respect. If this behavior continues, it won't be me standing here next time, it'll be law enforcement." Karen's face flushed deep red. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, another neighbor shouted, "Finally, someone's standing up to her." Another added, "She fined me $200 for painting my fence the wrong shade of white." Laughter and jeers spread across the street. For years, Karen had ruled through fear and manipulation, turning the HOA into her personal kingdom. But now, the kingdom had revolted. The people she once silenced were speaking freely, their voices rising against her. And every second that passed, her authority crumbled further. Karen pulled her son closer, her voice cracking as she tried one last desperate line. "You'll regret this. All of you. I am the HOA." But no one believed her anymore. Not after tonight. Not after the truth had been dragged into the open. And standing in the center of it all, silent but immovable, was my daughter's father. Not yelling. Not threatening. Just existing, and that alone was enough to turn the tables completely. The morning after felt different. The air was lighter, the street quieter, almost as if the neighborhood itself had shed a heavy weight. 4 years, Karen's shadow loomed over every home, every family, every decision. But last night had changed everything. Word spread faster than wildfire. The video's neighbors had recorded hit local community groups within hours. By sunrise, Karen's carefully constructed image of neighborhood queen had crumbled into 1,000 shards. Clips of her son tying up my daughter, of her sneering dismissals, of my daughter's father standing tall and unshaken, every second was out there for all to see. And once the truth is on video, there's no sweeping it under the rug. By mid-morning, the HOA board was forced to act. They called an emergency meeting. For once, it wasn't Karen leading the conversation with her iron grip and false charm. It was the community speaking, neighbors who had endured years of fines, bullying, and intimidation. One by one, they raised their voices. She fined me for leaving my garbage can out an extra half hour. She threatened to sue me over my garden gnomes. She humiliated my kids in front of others. It was like a dam breaking. People had been holding their frustrations inside for too long, and now they were free to pour everything out. Karen sat stiffly in her chair, her son slouched beside her, while the HOA president read out the final decision. Effective immediately, Karen was stripped of her authority on the board. She could no longer issue fines, no longer bully, no longer hold power over anyone in the neighborhood. Her face burned crimson, but she couldn't argue. Not this time. The evidence was too clear, the witnesses too many. Her threats, her manipulations, her excuses, all of it had collapsed under the weight of truth. But the story didn't end there. The police got involved after reviewing the videos. What her son had done wasn't just kids being kids. It was dangerous. It was harmful. He was required to attend counseling, and Karen herself was warned that any repeat behavior could result in serious legal consequences. For a woman who had spent her life throwing around authority, it was the bitterest medicine to swallow. As for us, something beautiful happened. The neighbors who had once stayed silent, afraid of Karen's wrath, came forward to support us. They dropped by with kind words, with offers to help, with genuine warmth that had been missing from this street for too long. My daughter, who just a day before had been terrified and tied to a tree, now walked around with kids her age who promised they had her back. And her father, he didn't brag about what he'd done. He didn't gloat, didn't rub it in. That wasn't his style. He simply told our daughter, "You're safe now. Always." And that was enough. The most powerful part of this story isn't that Karen lost her title, or that her son faced consequences. It's that a community finally found its voice. One act of cruelty exposed years of abuse, and one man's calm strength gave others the courage to rise. Karen may have once believed she was the HOA, but now she was just another neighbor. A neighbor who would think twice before crossing anyone again. Because when you hurt a child, especially the daughter of a Delta Force soldier, you don't just make a mistake. You spark a reckoning.